Have you ever felt lost, as if God were distant and your prayers were being ignored? Have you ever looked at the chaos around you and wondered, if God is just, why does everything seem so wrong? These questions are more common than you might think, and they were exactly the doubts that consumed Habakkuk, a prophet who dared to do something many would consider a spiritual mistake. He challenged God. But don't think this made him less spiritual. On the contrary, his courage to confront divine silence led him to one of the greatest spiritual revelations of all time. He learned that true faith doesn't depend on easy answers or immediate blessings, but on unwavering trust in God's purpose, even when everything seems lost. Get ready for a spiritual journey that goes far beyond the quick fixes the world promises. Habakkuk discovered the true power of faith while facing his deepest doubts. And you can too. The question isn't whether you will face problems, but how you will handle those moments. If you are ready to understand how faith can transform despair into hope, keep reading. The answer you've been searching for might be closer than you think. Habakkuk was a man just like any of us, full of questions and doubts about life. He saw the chaos around him, violence in the streets, corrupt leaders, and people losing their faith. As a prophet, he expected God to act quickly to set things right, but it seemed like heaven was silent. How often do we feel the same way? We ask for answers, but the silence feels deafening. That anguish became the starting point for an honest and painful dialogue with God. In the midst of his spiritual crisis, Habakkuk dared to ask the question many are afraid to say aloud, "How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen?" Habakkuk 1:2. He didn't use scripted words or empty rituals. He was direct and sincere. His heart was broken, but his faith remained. Questioning didn't mean disbelief. It meant seeking understanding. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson. God isn't afraid of our questions. If you've ever looked at the world around you and wondered, why so much injustice, then you understand Habakkuk's dilemma. He saw his people being destroyed from within and threatened from the outside. What do you do when everything seems out of control? Habakkuk's response was to confront that reality with prayer. Not a resigned prayer, but a heartfelt plea. When the soul is restless, the heart prays. Many times we associate questioning with spiritual weakness, but Habakkuk teaches us the opposite. Asking God questions is an act of faith. It's believing that there is an answer, even if we don't understand it yet. This attitude challenges the idea of passive faith. In reality, expressing doubt opens the way for deeper revelation. But are we ready to hear the answer? In his search, Habakkuk didn't receive an immediate solution, but that didn't stop him from continuing to seek. He remained faithful, even without understanding God's plan. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson for our moments of despair. When everything seems meaningless, we can choose to cry out or give up. Habakkuk chose to cry out. And you, what do you choose when facing difficulties? As he prayed, something extraordinary happened. He didn't find a magical solution to his problems, but he found something even more powerful. A divine answer that would change his perspective forever. But this answer was far from what he expected. God's response to Habakkuk was, to say the least, unsettling. Instead of offering a quick and comforting solution, he revealed a surprising plan. He would use the Babylonians, a brutal and power-hungry nation, as an instrument of judgment against Judah, Habakkuk 1:6. Imagine Habakkuk's bewilderment. It was like hearing that the cure for an illness would be a bitter and painful medicine. It seemed unfair, but it was part of a much greater purpose. God was teaching something profound about justice. It isn't a simple equation or about immediate results. For Habakkuk, it was hard to understand why God would allow such a wicked people to prosper while the righteous suffered. How often do we wonder why bad things happen to good people? God's answer was clear. He is sovereign. and his justice goes beyond human understanding. This lesson challenges us even today. In our limited perspective, we want the righteous to be rewarded and the wicked to be punished immediately. But God sees the bigger picture. Like an artist painting a masterpiece with complex brushstrokes, his plan includes elements that may seem contradictory at first glance. Habakkuk had to learn to trust even when nothing made sense. God does not ignore evil, nor forget those who suffer. He assured Habakkuk that the Babylonians would also be judged for their arrogance and cruelty. Habakkuk 2:8-9. This reminds us that divine justice may be delayed, but is inevitable. The challenge is to wait patiently, trusting that in due time everything will be set right. Habakkuk was being led to a deeper level of faith, believing in God's justice even when he couldn't see evidence of it around him. This is one of the greatest spiritual lessons. True faith doesn't depend on immediate proof, but on the certainty that God is just, even when the world seems consumed by injustice. However, knowing this didn't take away Habakkuk's pain. The revelation he received was harsh, but it also brought hope. Now he had to decide, would he remain trapped in his doubts or take a step beyond, trusting in God's justice? Habakkuk faced a crucial choice: live paralyzed by fear or move forward by faith. The world around him was collapsing, Judah was on the brink of destruction, and Babylon was preparing to invade with overwhelming force. Even so, in the midst of this chaos, God told him something revolutionary: the righteous shall live by his faith. Habakkuk 2:4. A short but powerful phrase that would become a cornerstone of spirituality for future generations. This truth teaches us that faith isn't an escape from reality, but a way to face it with courage. Habakkuk didn't deny the gravity of the situation, but chose to believe in God despite the circumstances. This is very different from expecting everything to be magically resolved. Active faith demands action, even when the outcome is uncertain. It's like planting seeds in the middle of a storm, believing in the harvest to come. How often do we find ourselves like Habakkuk, surrounded by seemingly unsolvable problems? It might be a financial crisis, an unexpected illness, or the loss of a loved one. True faith doesn't ignore pain, but endures it with hope. It's not about pretending everything is fine, but trusting in God even when everything seems lost. Habakkuk also learned that living by faith means letting go of the need to control the outcome. He realized that God was at work, even when he couldn't see it. This is not easy to accept, especially for those who seek immediate answers. Faith is an invitation to walk into the unknown, trusting in God's promise. This lesson was a turning point in Habakkuk's life. He didn't receive guarantees that the situation would improve quickly, but he understood that his faith didn't depend on that. Uncertainty wasn't the end, but the starting point for a deeper trust. God didn't promise to spare him from adversity, but assured him that he would be with him through it. As his prayers transformed into declarations of trust, Habakkuk began to see his reality through a different lens. The external battle continued, but something new blossomed within his heart, an unshakable faith born in the midst of the greatest uncertainty of his life. At the peak of his anguish, Habakkuk received a clear command from God: "Write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it." Habakkuk 2:2. God was about to reveal a future marked by both judgment and redemption. It was an urgent message meant not only for Habakkuk but also for future generations. This vision wasn't merely a prediction, but a guarantee that divine justice would be fulfilled, even if it seemed delayed. The vision Habakkuk received was challenging. He saw Babylon as an arrogant and violent empire destined for destruction because of its cruelty. But the prophet also saw something far greater, a promise of restoration. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Habakkuk 2:14. This showed that God's purpose went far beyond judgment. It involved renewal and hope. The vision was clear. but its fulfillment seemed distant. God instructed Habakkuk to record everything precisely, ensuring that no one would forget his promise. The lesson here is powerful. Hope must be written down and kept alive. In times of uncertainty, remembering God's promises keeps us steadfast. Just as the prophet engraved his words on tablets, we can record our prayers and victories so we don't lose sight of what God has promised. Habakkuk realized that divine justice wouldn't be swift, but would be certain. The seemingly invincible Babylon would fall, but at God's appointed time. This truth invites us to live by faith, even when reality around us seems to scream otherwise. God doesn't act according to our schedule, but according to his sovereign plan. This vision challenged Habakkuk to look beyond his immediate situation. The promise that God's glory would fill the earth became an anchor for his soul. He understood that he was seeing only part of the story, but that God controlled the whole picture. How often do we forget this in our own lives, but the vision didn't end there. Habakkuk was about to receive something even deeper, a divine answer that would transform his life and shape his future in unimaginable ways. After so many questions and pleas, God's answer finally came. However, it didn't come as a simple solution or a promise of easier times. God revealed a plan that went beyond human understanding. He would use the Babylonians as an instrument of correction, but would also judge them for their cruelty. Habakkuk 2:8-9. It was an answer full of justice and sovereignty, difficult to accept, but filled with purpose. Habakkuk had to grapple with the complexity of God's response. He wanted immediate intervention and visible mercy, but received a vision blending judgment and redemption. This teaches us that God's plans aren't linear or predictable. He often works through the most challenging situations to accomplish something far greater than we can imagine. Divine justice may seem slow, but it never fails. God revealed that Judah's suffering was not the end, but a part of his eternal purpose. Just as winter prepares the ground for spring, difficult times can be the prelude to great transformations. In our own lives, this means that even the most painful struggles can have a deeper meaning when seen from God's perspective. God's answer didn't erase Habakkuk's pain, but it brought clarity. Judah's corruption, violence, and desolation wouldn't go unpunished, but neither would they escape God's merciful gaze. The prophet began to understand that God's purpose included not only correction, but also restoration. It was a complete justice guided by divine sovereignty. Habakkuk realized that he wasn't standing before a distant God, but a creator deeply involved in human history. God's response was more than an announcement of judgment. It was a promise that nothing escapes his control. For us, this understanding brings hope. Even in the darkest moments, we can trust that God is working to fulfill his purposes. But this revelation demanded more than understanding. It required transformation. Habakkuk was about to experience a profound change in his heart, leading him to an unforgettable song of faith and hope. Amid all the pain, confusion, and divine silence, something extraordinary happened to Habakkuk. The prophet who began his journey filled with doubts emerged with renewed faith and a clear vision of God's purpose. He understood that his role wasn't to solve the mystery of God's plans, but to trust him. From that trust came one of the most powerful songs in Scripture, a declaration of unshakable faith, even in the midst of chaos. Habakkuk 3:17-19. This song wasn't mere poetry, but a mature spiritual response. Habakkuk recognized that the circumstances around him hadn't changed. Judah was still threatened, Babylon remained strong, but something within him had been deeply transformed. He declared, "Though the fig tree may not blossom, yet I will rejoice in the Lord." This is the essence of faith, rejoicing not because of what is seen, but because of what is believed. This transformation didn't happen overnight. Habakkuk had to walk through the valley of doubt, face the fire of uncertainty, and endure the darkness of divine silence to find genuine faith. In our lives, moments of suffering can become God's workshop, where He shapes our character and strengthens our trust. Faith doesn't remove the pain, but endures it with courage and hope. Habakkuk teaches us that true worship doesn't depend on favorable circumstances. His faith wasn't anchored in material blessings or immediate promises, but in God's sovereignty and faithfulness. He knew that his hope wasn't an illusion, but a spiritual certainty. This challenges us to re-evaluate what sustains our faith, what we have, or who God is. At the end of his journey, Habakkuk didn't just receive a divine answer, but was transformed by it. He became a prophet of hope, not because everything was resolved, but because his trust in God was firmly established. The one who questioned divine justice now proclaimed God's sovereignty with conviction and joy. This song of hope still resonates today as an eternal reminder that we can find purpose even in the darkest moments. But this wasn't Habakkuk's final lesson. His story didn't end with his personal transformation, but extended to future generations as a priceless legacy. The impact of Habakkuk's words transcended his time and became an immortal spiritual legacy. His final song was not just a personal outpouring, but a message of faith for all who face difficult times. The Apostle Paul quoted Habakkuk in his letter to the Romans, "The righteous shall live by faith." Romans 1:17, reaffirming the relevance of this teaching for the early church and humanity throughout generations. The depth of his message lies in the fact that he did not live to see the fulfillment of all of God's promises. Babylon fell, but long after his death. Even so, his faith didn't depend on seeing immediate results, but on trusting in the unchanging character of God. This is the power of a life lived by faith. It surpasses the boundaries of time and becomes a spiritual inheritance for future generations. Habakkuk's words echoed during times of crisis, inspiring those who also faced oppression and injustice. During the persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire, his declaration of faith became a beacon of hope. His words encouraged thousands to endure trials, standing firm in the certainty that God would not abandon them, even when everything seemed lost. Today, his legacy remains alive. In moments when answers seem distant and justice seems delayed, his words challenge us to persevere. He reminds us that true faith is not built on what we can see or understand, but on unwavering trust in God's sovereignty. This teaching is as relevant today as it was centuries ago. Habakkuk also teaches us that it's possible to question God without losing faith. His questions came from a sincere search for understanding, not from rebellion. God did not reject him for his doubts, but guided him to a deeper vision of his justice and mercy. This encourages us to draw closer to God even in the most challenging times. His final song became more than a poem. It was a hymn of hope, a prayer for uncertain times, and an eternal reminder that, though the fig tree may not blossom, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. Habakkuk shows us that even when the future looks bleak, we can trust that God is writing a story of redemption far greater than we can imagine. Habakkuk's life was not just a journey of doubts and answers, but of profound spiritual transformation. He shows us that it's possible to question God, cry out, and wait with faith. Perhaps today you are facing a similar crisis. The question that remains is, will you choose to give up or trust? Let these lessons inspire you to live with unshakable faith, even in the face of uncertainty. Write down your prayers, record your dreams, and trust in God's promises. And remember, even when the world seems to be falling apart around you, the righteous shall live by faith. If this message touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and share it so that more people can be impacted. May your journey of faith be strengthened with every new step. See you next time.